and welcome to UCT's 2-hour workshop on visualizing course data for academic staff. I think we have several presenters here today, but they all are part of UCT's data working group. And this 2-hour session will examine how UCT are actually analyzing and working with their Know Your Course and students reports and how they've set it up in terms of their infrastructure, and basically then how these reports are being used by academics and academic support staff, as well as, of course, planners, institutional planning, and other staff. The focus will be on how they will use the data and how they will visualize the course data. And of course, it's going to be very interactive. There's a breakaway planned. And the idea then is for you to take away UCT's experience and see how you could perhaps use this to develop your own reports in terms of visualizing course data. So thank you so much and welcome. And over to you, UCT.
I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who's going to start the introduction.
Great. Greg was the one with the slide controls. So welcome everybody from our team at UCT. We're the data analytics for student success, and we are kind of the other side of the coin from Siyaphumelela at UCT. So the two initiatives are very closely related and high overlap of people involved in the two initiatives. And so we're pleased to bring you this workshop, which is the second time we run this, and we're in parts here to facilitate a discussion with all of you about how to use student data and course data with academic staff to promote discussion around course curriculum, outcomes, student success issues, and as a particular case study to show you what we've done at UCT, which won't be exactly the same as what you might have done or might be able to do, because every university is different, but we're going to tell you about our process and some of the things we've learned along the way, and hopefully you might find that useful, and then we'll have some discussion. So we have an overview slide, I think. Right, okay. So the first thing we're going to dive into is the introductions, and so thank you for the welcome from Sadie from the Siyaphumelela side. We have quite a few people from the DAS team here, so I'm just going to ask everybody very briefly to say hi and tell you who they are today. And then we'll move on to your introductions. So I'm Stephen. I work in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, and I lead the DAS initiative, which is quite a well, it has a couple of different aspects, but we have a loose organic bottom-up working team and then a formal committee, which is a governance structure. Rashna, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm Riyashna Sittledeen. I am in institutional planning, head of the institutional information unit, and I also head up the Siyaphumelela initiative at UCT, and so work closely with Stephen and the DAS teams. I'm part of the DAS as well, and the DAS team on these data initiatives. Thank you. Kende.
Hi, my name is Kende Kafale. I'm the data analyst, information analyst in the institutional planning department. I am one of Riyashna's analysts, and I am the data analyst for the DAS, the data analytics for student success. And I will be a little bit later on talking about the reports that we've developed. Over to you. Who's Deepti next?
Salute.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Sanet Stein. I am not officially part of the DAS team. I'm a friend of DAS, and I work in the Center for Educational Assessments that are responsible for the development of the MBTs. So anything related to the diagnostic use of that information is sort of what we take care of in this project.
Greg?
Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Krull. I'm from the Center for Innovation Learning and Teaching, where I'm in academic staff development. I'm new to the DAS team from this year, and I'm involved in supporting capacity development and supporting staff around data literacies and things like that. Thank you.
Deepti?
Hi everyone, I'm Dipti. I'm a project manager in institutional planning. I work on the DAS and SIA Pumalela project at UCT. Thank you.
Okay, right. So now we're over to your introduction. So this is the Woo Clap. Ray, can you share the actual Woo Clap itself, or what is the easiest way to do this?
Yeah, let me do that.
Okay, so we want to show quickly the results. So not everyone has joined the Woo Clap, but you can still, and we have 2 more questions. So we've got quite a few people who've introduced themselves. Rosh, an academic development practitioner, Tuwanga, Prof. Makondo, student success researcher. Oh, that's Oliver. Swandile, academic student support. So some people directly involved in teaching, some people in academic support and development, some people in Sipomalela lead roles. And okay, so we're going to just move on to the second question in the interest of time, but if you'd still like to introduce yourselves, please feel free to just type into the chat who you are, tell your colleagues a bit more about you. Okay, so the second question is, what would you most like to learn more about during the workshop? If you've got a particular interest, then please tell us what that is. Why are you here today? I'll give this a minute or so.
That's Vyashna's keyboard.
Sorry.
Noisy keyboarder. Okay, maximize data, presentation and analysis, data-driven approaches to enhance student success. I guess that's why we're all here. Fantastic. Developmental reports, visualization, intervention. What structures that do the teaching and learning work? Excellent question. Lots of variety there across universities. Using data for timely interventions. That's a big theme of ours in DAS. Trying to speed up the data to action timeline. Okay, data for reporting, particularly on impacts, using data pragmatically, another important aspect. Okay, thanks for those answers. And we are going to go on to the third question, which is a purpose question. What's the most important reason for us to think about how we visualize our student data? Let's get your some ideas on this. Okay. Analysis, represent performance, be creative. Data that's useful, informative, common theme, easy to understand, very important. Okay, I'm just going to change the format of that. Okay, for planning and reaching a wider audience, critical. Okay, great. I think that's captured the themes quite well. Okay, thank you everybody for sharing a bit about who you are and why you're here. So let's move into the next section. Which is Rashna.
Great. Okay, thank you, Stephen. So, colleagues, this actually speaks a little bit to one of the comments about what are some of the structures in which this kind of work is being done at different institutions. So, we wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of that case at UCT and how we do the work that we do. On the slide in front of you is, on the left, is a paper that we've written that describes the ways in which we structure our work in the DAS in quite a bit of detail. So my purpose here is just to give you a very, very brief 5-minute summary of that. So, I mean, most of the audience here already knows what we mean by business intelligence in higher education, but essentially it is the collecting and analyzing, presenting of data to support decision making. We want to take raw data and we want to transform those into actionable insights. And then overall, we want to improve organizational performance, specifically in our case, in the DAS around teaching and learning. So the value proposition in terms of using business intelligence in higher education is we can enhance operation, we can improve staff and student experiences. Very, very important for us in our work in the DAS is how do we really visualize and mobilize resources around addressing inequities in outcomes, and then how do we better support student engagement and performance. Now, the rest of this slide is things that that is common to all of us and is true for UCT as well. And when we move on to the next slide, not yet, it will become clear how we've tried to mitigate some of these common constraints that we all face. So, more often than not, when we get faced with this idea that we have to build our business intelligence capacity, we think, oh, well, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough money. One of the major issues in data work, as many of you know, is this high turnover of technical staff. There's without dedicated personnel, it's hard to form formal structures. And one of the other constraints is how do you build an organization that is learning and changing through the use of data so that it's not sitting in these pockets of excellence around the institution, but then doesn't become part of the ways in which we do things at the institution overall. Another common constraint that we find around building business intelligence capacity is that if you have informal collaboration between interested colleagues, how then do you have accountability for the work, and who drives that work, and how does it not just fall apart if one person leaves? And then the last constraint that many of us face is that you can produce an incredible amount of work and data visualizations and all kinds of things. But if you don't have a community that can access what you produce and understand what you produce, you run into an issue of all that work kind of being wasted in a sense. So that was kind of some of the things that we identified as the DAS when we started to come together about what we needed to address in order to make this work more sustainable and more scalable. Next slide, please, Greg. And so just to give you a sense of sort of how we came about where we are now, we started as a collection of people, just people with other full-time jobs and for whom this work was not really written into our job descriptions. It was a collection of interested people who came together to collaborate on certain highly necessary projects at the time. And the Know Your Course is one of those projects that Kende will talk about later, but we sort of just started to collaborate. And as we began to collaborate on these different, very specific projects, we realized we were developing a community of practice where we were meeting on a weekly basis, and interested people from across the institution, even if they weren't working on a specific project, would attend these meetings and then would contribute, or it would be part of their own learning and development. And that's sort of how we built this community over time. Just to give you a reference point, we really started going in 2020, 2021. And then the last stage of that building capacity was that the work was now formally reports to a subcommittee of the Senate Teaching and Learning. So that is a sort of, just to give you a very brief sense of where we started and where we are. And because many institutions might find themselves at different points on this journey. And so we just thought that was interesting to elaborate on. And then next slide, please. This is my last slide. And then finally, one of the things that we've been doing as the DAS group is trying to reflect on what exactly is it we want to work towards, so that the work does become scalable, as well as, I think for the Siyaphumelela conference, we talk about scaling wide and scaling deep. So scaling in lots of different directions. How we've come to think of ourselves is as a virtual business intelligence competence center. Virtual because we all exist in different places within the university, so we're a virtual structure. And we each come with our own lenses, perspectives, and expertise. So we're a distributed framework, and we leverage that capacity to do the work that we do in the DAS. As I mentioned, we now have a formal relationship with Senate Teaching and Learning, but the work that we're hoping to do going forward is really to formalize what the individual roles are within our within our grouping, and then taking that forward to build professional development and capacity to do this work in a formal, structured way. We now have we have a literacy and capacity building program that we are working on. And then finally, what we're really looking at is how to have some standardized practices for data management and analytics at UCT. So I'll leave it there. And yes, the idea was really just to give the colleagues a sense of who does this work, how we do it, and how we've come to do the work that you're going to hear about today. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks. So let me just check back with our overview. Right, we are heading soon into Kende's section where he is going to tell you about your Know Your Course and Students report. But Greg, if we can just flip back to that previous slide. No, the one we started at. Okay, so Riyashna has talked about the Virtual Intelligence Competency Center as DAS. This is a slide we often use just to contextualize student success when we talk to groups of academic staff. And so we realize there are different lenses on student success. And so you can look at this from the student perspective or from the institution perspective. And broadly, we're concerned around analytics as a lens. So it's a theory of change. The theory of change with a small t theory is around visibility and providing actionable insights, but it's also just never the complete story. So we're quite cautious to contextualize this and say that the analytics and the reports and the insights here are a starting point, but practitioners, academics always need to bring something additional to really think through what these mean and what to do with it. And in DAS, we've been focused on two broad areas of work. This particularly is where we're talking about course level reporting and analytics. And then we do a fair bit of work at looking at progression through programs, for example, which is a different set of approaches and concerns. And So the example today is essentially about course level reporting, which is one aspect, but not the whole picture. Okay, thanks. Okay, Kende, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. My part, what I'm going to present is what we've actually produced. What we've produced is 5 pages of analytics on students and courses that we distribute to course conveners at the beginning of each course cycle. So it could be at the beginning of the first semester or at the beginning of the second semester. Sometimes we do it twice in the same year for those year-long courses. These 5 pages were not created at the same time. First, we had only the first 2 pages, and then over time, it grew as the demands grew and more informations were required about these, about different aspects of courses and of students. One of the things that we started with, which was felt to be very important at the beginning of our journey, was to get together with faculties separately in a conversation about what is it that they would like to see, what kind of data would actually help them think about their courses a little bit more carefully before the beginning of the course, so that they can prepare a little bit better for the students that are coming in. So we had these separate conversations with the 6 different faculties that we have here at UCT. And we drew up a list of all the nice to haves and the good to haves and the must haves data points that people listed. So eventually what you see is the coming together of all the different variables that we have in our systems that we put on a couple of pages and that we started distributing to lecturers now about 4 years ago. So the report has gone through a few iterations since. So the first page of the report, like I said, it's about courses, it's about students and about courses. And the first page of the course of this report is about the students themselves. So a lecturer would have a sense of who the students are that they are dealing with, or that will be that are enrolled into their courses at the beginning of their semesters. Greg, we can go to the first report page. Yes, and the next one. Thank you. So this is what the first page of the report looks like. What you have is an example from 2 different faculties of the same report from the 2 different faculties. One of the things that I should mention in the beginning is that this form has this report has different parts. You know, the top part where you see the title and a headline figure. That's quite attention-grabbing, gives you a certain sense of how many students, for example, in this particular page, how many students are enrolled in this course. On the side, we have different definitions of the different visuals that we have in the body of the report itself. In the bottom, we have a couple of links, one leading to a comprehensive document that outlines and details the different variables that are listed here, as well as a feedback form, and to which people and lecturers are invited to make recommendations and give feedback on the report that they have. And also what we have is a date of generation of the report, so that the people will always know that this is the latest report that they have, and in case somebody sends them an older report, that they will know that it was produced in a certain point in time. So this, as far as this first page is concerned, what we have is what we call the Know Your Student page, where we display, where we show the difference biographical, demographic, as well as academic profiles of the students in that particular course. Here we have about 1,000 students, and we have further broken them down by gender, by nationality, by dress categories and entrance categories, as well as the school deciles. The school decile, if I start with the school decile, is something that we do at UCT in terms of ranking the different schools that the students come from. We just rank them and we divide them into 10. And the highest will have the number 1 position, and the lowest with the 10. And the gray bar that you see very in wide is those coming from independent schools that are not ranked according to the other metrics. So what you have here is a vast majority of the students in this particular course coming from either independent or very high ranking schools. That big blue slice of the donut that you see is the number one ranking schools. So these students are coming from highly ranked or independent private school. What else? Well, the other things that we have in there is for example, the entrance category shows us if that student is a student first time entering undergraduate student who started at UCT for the first time, or if that student has been in the system for some time, or if that student has transferred over from some other program or faculty. What else we have in there is the distribution, what we call the admissions redress categories. Our admissions policy has different ways of admitting students. Open students, which require no additional admission redress categories, as well as the other 4 different admission categories that are to do with the parents of the students who are applying to study at UCT. So it's a little bit detailed, but we can get into it as needed going forward or later on in our conversations. Other than that, what we have here is the academic profile of the students in the NSC and in the NBTs. And what you have in those big numbers are the current students for the median grades for the mathematics and the English grades, as well as historical view of the same grades over the last few years for the same class. So that is to really help the course conveners see if a similar trend continues or if there has been some changes along the way. And later on, and in the bottom of the screen, what you have is the NBTs, the national benchmark tests, and the different competencies and the levels that the students have attained. So these are divided up into the academic literacies and quantitative literacy, as well as mathematics. And depending on the course, not all of the students may be required to do maths, but the other 2 are mostly required by most courses, and UCT requires NBT results as part of the admissions process, even though some of the faculties may not actively be using it. But we display it here nonetheless to give a complete view of the student's profile. The next page will be about the course grade, and here we will have a view of the different course attainments in the course, and we used 4 different kind of visuals to do that. Next. The course attainment here we have as leading numbers will be the median grades, as well as the 3-year pass rate for the course up top in the top right corner. And we have 4 different ways of visualizing basically the same thing. So this is really showing the distribution of grades in that particular course in 4 different ways. Different people have different ways of understanding visualizations, and different visualizations have the possibility or the potential to display or hide information. So what we are trying to do here is really giving the lecturers different views of the same data, so that they can make informed decisions, so that they have a more rounded view of what the course grade distribution may look like. For example, the ones on top, the bars show the actual headcount numbers of those who attained a certain class of grades, as opposed to the one in the middle and the left that shows the proportion of those who attained a certain class of grades. For example, the reds in that bottom stacked bar chart shows the number of students, the proportion of the students who have failed the course, and the lighter to dark blues show the different levels from 3rd to lower second, to second to upper second, and to first, the darkest being the first. So a quick look at the charts will give a sense of how well students have been doing in the course in the past 5 years, for the past 5 years. Obviously, there will be no data for the current year, because this will have been sent at the beginning of the year, of the course year itself. Another visualization that we have is the box and whiskers, and the box and whiskers is very good in showing the extremes and where the extremes lie, as well as what the central values look like. Again, this gives a very good overview at a glance to show how things were and how things were going. And you will see that the second box and whisker chart will have its box raised a little bit high up, as well as in the stacked bar charts, you'll see that the rates, the failed students were very low. That is, of course, consistent with our experience during 2020, when we had a much lower failure rates in our courses, and higher grades, higher association of higher grades attained. And the last one is what we call the distribution curves. You can think of it in terms of a normal curve that has been split up and mirrored. So what you really have is the edge cases, the distribution of the different grades and the volume of those grades after being ranked. And the bubbles show us just the volume of the students that are found in that particular grade band, in that particular grade. So this is again another way of showing how students are distributed, how grades of students are distributed. What you see as the big bubbles are the ones that are stuck around 50, where we tend to have more grades assigned as 50 when students have sat for supplementary exams, or when students have failed and redone them, but ultimately they're receiving only a 50 for that. That's why you will see those bubbles a little bit bigger in those things. But all in all, this is just our attempt with the assistance of lecturers to show what grades look like, and the distribution of grades looked like over time for the particular course. If a course convener has been convening this course for a long time, they will probably have a good sense of how things were going and how they are, but this will give them a very precise idea of where things actually were. And if it's a course convener who's doing this for the first time, then they will have a sense of how things were and where things stood when they've taken over this course. So this is the second page of our report, and now we'll go to the third page, which happens to be one of the core principles that guided one of the core guiding principles for the data analytics for student success. And it is really to do with the different kinds of gaps that's been noticed over time on campuses such as UCT and elsewhere as well. So this is what we call now known as the redress gap, the difference between Black and white students in terms of their attainments, and the university's plans and procedures to really try and reduce that gap wherever it might appear. So in this next page, we will have an example of the page. Next one, Greg. Yes, thank you. This one will give us, this page just outlines the three gaps that we've identified, the racial gap, the financial aid, as well as the gender gap. And on the top right corner, you will see that for this course, there is about a 9% gap of a 3-year 9% difference in attainment between Black and white students. And later on the left, you will see the big numbers are actually for the 5 years that the chart is showing the gap for. So we have redress, financial aid, and gender. Although gender is not always an important marker in terms of gaps, we still have female students outperforming male students consistently in most of our classes. And the bottom one is a further elaboration on the course performance that we saw previously in a previous chart, but this time split into two distinct categories of redresses. So this is the open category, where all students who didn't declare any of their biographic markers for redress for admissions considerations, as well as the redress category 1, which would map on the Black students. So you will see here that the ones in the open category are consistently lower failure rates if you're just looking at the red bars, as opposed to the ones in the redress category 1, where you'll see consistently again a higher level of failed students. So this is the redress gap report page that we hope lecturers and course conveners and heads of departments will keep their eyes on, because this is one of the strategic as well as necessary inputs that the university would like to make towards the teaching and learning process, that there are these gaps that we've noticed, and we're tracking them and we're keeping our eyes on them. And this is one way of tracking if our interventions are working. So from here, what we go towards is what I call the diagnostics page. I will not spend too much time on this because we have the people that we co-developed this with in the room with that Sanet, which is introduced herself earlier, and she will walk us through properly through how the diagnostic page works. So basically what it does is it uses the NBT results, because we have very granular data in terms of competencies that the students have, and it correlates it to performance in the particular course. So a correlation then can be made to determine what the highest ranking competencies that are associated with performance in the course. And it gives the course convener an idea of what competencies may be lacking in this particular cohort of students, and in what way maybe a course design could be carried out based on this idea. But I will let Sanet speak about that after my presentation here. So I'll go to the next and to the last page of this report, where we show how other students have done in this course in other courses. So one of the requests, this is added on as a request from lecturers. They wanted to know, okay, I know how my course is doing and how it's been doing for the last few years, but I would like to know how it compares to other courses. So what we did was we added one more page where we showed how students performed in other courses. Those students who are enrolled in this particular course in previous years, how they have performed in other courses in previous years. And we took about 10 courses. We ranked the courses and we took the ones that were the most subscribed, the most popular ones by the students, and we displayed them in terms of in the views that you see here in terms of the box and whiskers that you see. On top of that, what we have is just a distribution of the students, because where are they coming? Where are these students coming from? It's one thing to know that they are all in my class, but it's not always obvious to the lecturers if all of the students are coming from the same program or from the same faculty. Here, what you see is most of these students are coming from commerce faculty, but there are some students that are coming from engineering as well as humanities. The last bit that I will add here is that this is mostly undergraduate focused, but over time we've realized, and there were consistent comments from course conveners, that we needed to give them a postgraduate view, as that's a little bit more different than this. So the next page will show us the postgraduate view that we've created by stripping the existing report to its only course performance view, and adding a few variables that are more appropriate to postgraduate studies. That is like, where are the students coming from, what's the gender breakdown, as well as what were their median grades before they joined. UCT's requirements for honors and further studies requires about 65% attainment. So consistently, you will see that 65%. In addition to that, we have listed what prior UCT qualifications they have and the different if they are not from if they are not from UCT where they've received their previous qualifications. So these are the pages that we've created, and it took us a few years, and it's still under development. We are continuously developing it, and Stephen will tell you a little bit later on how this is now made available on demand from the institutional learning management system, that course conveners can request this on demand at a time they need to directly from their course sites.
But that's what I have for this. And next, I think Sanet will walk us through some of the NBT subdomains and how they work towards the design of a course and how they help us diagnose students in our courses. Thank you.
Thank you, Kende. So just to take you through this component of the report, we'll use an example of a case to show you how you could utilize it. But important to note that that particular page has two main parts. So we'll focus first on the top part and then move to the bottom part. So in the particular case that we're looking at here, we have a lecturer who noticed that one group within the course that they were presenting, a group from a specific program, the students from that program were performing very differently from the rest of the students in the group. And so they wanted to investigate a little more what the potential reasons for that can be, and if whether or not the observations were actually something they could track and prove, and not just a gut feel. So important to note here, we're not just looking at that diagnostic page, right? So at the top of the diagnostic page, you have this particular cohort's subdomain level breakdown of their results in the MBT tests, right? One for each of the domains. But you also need to look back at other parts of the report to understand who this cohort is, as well as to understand how this might relate to them. So you'd want to look at elements from that demographics page. You'd want to maybe look at how many of the students in the particular, in this cohort are first time enrolling for the course, etc. So you need that little bit of context. And then the subdomain breakdown here is presented in the form of a box and whisker plot. So not the first time in the report you see this. You did see that in the course grade distribution as well. But just to sort of draw your attention to the two main things we want to notice here. The first is where the medians are. So those little lines in the center indicate where the half where half of the class is, right? So you have the one half of the class below that line and one half of the class above that line. And that shows you more or less how the group as a whole is performing performed in that particular subdomain on their MBT. And that you want to see where the lower medians are. So for example, in the one we're looking at here, you can notice that text genre is one of the subdomains in the academic literacy that has a fairly significant dip in that median compared to the other medians that are there. So that's the only one that's closer to the 50%. So that means that 50% of the class are performed below 50% on all of the items that were related to that particular skills area. Something similar with the change in rates and happening with the quantitative literacy. And we also see that slightly the number sense in the mathematics was there, but as this was a course where mathematics was a prerequisite and a highly selective course, overall the performances was a little bit better. However, the other thing we want to look at is the range of those scores. So even though this highly selective course required a very high score in NSC mathematics, you see that for these subdomains, there were scores ranging across the board for these, which indicates that we have students with varying levels of ability in these particular skills when presented in a different way to what they are used to in the NSC, which is something important for us to note. So we look at the ranges and the ones that have the widest ranges, as well as where the lowest medians are. We can move to the next slide. Thanks. Greg? And that's just a summary of that. We can move on then. So what we then do when we look at the lower half of that diagnostics page is this is the relative importance analysis. Now, this is not about the cohort that is currently enrolled like the one before. So the subdomain analysis is for the cohort that is currently enrolled for the course. This graph shows you an overview of performance, historical performance on this. So this is when this example was made, it was still a 3-year range. I think now we do it over the last 5 years. And so these are all previous cohorts that were enrolled for the course over those 3 years put together, and a multiple linear regression was run to see how their performance in the different subdomains in the MBT could potentially explain variation in their performance in the final course grade. So we're not looking here at what is the most difficult or that sort of thing, but rather what had the most significant relationship to that final course grade. And for our practical use of that, we usually look at, say, the top 5 or 6 subdomains. In this case, we have change in rates, geometric reasoning, shape, dimension, and space, quantity, number, and operations, and number sense that popped out as the top the top 5 subdomains in terms of relative importance. And you'll notice that both change in rates and the number sense are subdomains that we also noticed that the new cohort that are enrolled now was struggling with. So it might be an indication that given the prominence of that particular subdomain in the course, and the fact that there are some students that, more students that are maybe struggling a little bit with those skills, that if those skills are play a significant role in how they are assessed in the course, we might need to look at potential support for them. We can move on to the next slide. Thanks, Greg. And I think we can move on another one. So in the case of, sorry, no, just one back. In this case, this lecturer was also interested in how, if you were to break it down with into the different programs enrolled for the course, how they compared, as well as a few other comparisons in order to try and understand what was going on. So in this case, this is not part of the normal report, but something that can be requested as an additional breakdown of the relative importance analysis with a few tweaks in what the focus is. So, for example, in the top left corner, we have a comparison in terms of different enrollment years. So, whereas the other one had a combined view over a number of years, you could separate them out and see if there are changes in trends, particularly if you've noticed in your course grade distribution curve that you have the boxes moving around. It might be interesting to see if there was movement in other parts of the profile as well. So something like that. But next to that, on the top right, instead of using the course grade as the grade to compare it to, individual assignments were used. So the multiple linear regression was run to look at the subdomains, the MBT subdomains, compared to, say, test 1 and test 2, because in some cases, the nature of the assignments, particularly where you have blocks or modules within a course, can sometimes be very different in nature. The assessments can be different to such an extent that the type of support that is needed would vary as well. So it might be important there to see that whether or not there are differences there. If we look to the bottom, we could see the comparison with the different sub-cohorts. So here was her particular question, right, about one group within the larger group of students. And you could see there were quite a few little changes in not only how much the relative importance shifted, but also in which subdomains fall into those five with the highest relative importance. Just to note here, these graphs are obviously inverted from the other ones. The highest relative importance here is at the bottom rather than at the top. And then the final one was to look at within the particular cohort. If we were to divide the group into those with different ranges of scores, say those who have a first, upper second, a lower second, third, and then those that didn't pass the course. If we were to isolate those into separate groups and look at their profiles, was there something different there that might suggest that there's a characteristic from these particular domains or set of specific skills from those domains that are having a significant impact at those various levels? In this case, one of the things that we noticed was that at the bottom end and at the top end of the spectrum, the relative importance was very similar to the overall picture in terms of which subdomains were where and how the relationship looked. But when we moved to the point closer to the difference between a pass and a fail, students, the relative importance showed that the literacy areas, the literacy subdomains, suddenly popped out as being more important. So this was a mathematics dependent course. And so the green there that we see here for the mathematics is not totally unexpected, but you see that sometimes the quantitative literacy pops out as having a slightly more important role maybe there to play. So we can move on to the next slide. So it doesn't help us to just look at the numbers, right? The statistics just tells us one thing. It points us towards potential patterns, but we have to also understand what that could potentially mean for us. So we wouldn't just necessarily say if it's a top 5 subdomains statistically in that relative importance analysis that we necessarily have to do something with that information, or that there is a significant proportion of your course content that's related to it. So the part of that exercise would be to do a domain mapping to try and understand how the subdomains of each domain relates to your course content, right? So you would try to understand where things might be directly present and where it might be, say, a proxy for type of thinking. So, for example, we've seen in a philosophy course that geometric reasoning has come out as being a very, very strong subdomain in terms of the relative importance. But there's no geometric reasoning in a philosophy course. However, the structure of the way the geometric reasoning types of questions are asked has to do with building an argument, which is part and parcel of that building an academic argument thing in philosophy. So there, it's not that you say that geometric reasoning is in some way present in the philosophy curriculum, but perhaps the type of thinking that is needed in order to do the one has some sort of relationship to the skills that they use when they are engaging in the course itself. So you see here we've unpacked just a snippet, one exercise from the course to see how the various subdomains relate to it, and picked out what you would want pay attention to there. So for example, for the academic literacy, there's a difference between how the question 14A and B is asked to question C and D. 14A and B ask it in a way that is very follows a particular template, and it's sort of the standard way of asking the question, whereas C and D are both embedded in the specific context of the question. So it's not asking if H is 0, solve for T. It assumes that they will, from the context, be able to derive that when the rock is on the surface, H is equal to 0. So there's an additional layer there that is necessary, an additional step of inferencing that's needed there that you would want to pick up on. And that would be one of the things that we would point out in terms of mapping academic literacy to this. So if we move to the next slide, I think this is the last one. Thank you, Greg. So we have, firstly, we identify subdomain areas that might be problematic for our particular cohort of students who are enrolled for the course this semester, and that we find directly like that in the report for the cohort. But then we also need to try and, in some way, understand how this is relevant to our course curriculum. So we want to put the stats into conversation with the actual teaching and learning. And based on that, try and find possible solutions to that, whether that means some sort of in-class solution, maybe signposting, maybe providing additional materials, or maybe just spending a little bit more time on certain things. Or maybe it means that there is something that needs to happen outside of the classroom. So additional resources or they need to consult like centers of excellence that focus on particular areas, or maybe certain support services, or even self-directed tools that they can utilize. So depending on your particular situation, that would be options to explore. So that's it from my side. I'll hand over, I think, to Stephen for the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Annette. So we're about halfway through. If you'd like to stand up and stretch, please feel free to do that. So we have a little bit of time now. If there's something that you've seen that you would like to ask some more questions about in this particular report format that we've developed, then we'd like to take some time to answer those questions or give you some clarity. We have answered a couple of questions in the chat, but you might have seen something that sparked your interest. So please feel free to either pop your question in the chat or unmute and switch on your camera if you'd like to, and ask us anything about this particular report. Who will go first? Okay, Tawonga, measurement of aspects such as academic literacy, quantitative literacy, what were the variables and how were they measured? So I think this relates to the NBT scores. So if we, Greg, if you can rewind to the page that shows that first breakdown. So the AL and QL come from the NBT scores themselves. So when students are writing the NBT test prior to admission, typically in their grade 12 year, then that produces these three different scores. So each student will have an AL score, a QL score, and so they correct me here, a math score.
Yeah.
Sorry, Greg, rewind further. All the way to that page 1 of QoS, yes.
Yeah, so everyone writes the AQL, which is the combined academic literacy and quantitative literacy paper. And then people opt for writing the mathematics in addition to that, should they need to for the particular faculty they are applying to, or for the field of study. So yeah, the academic literacy and the quantitative literacy is delivered as a combined paper. And for all of them, the subdomains are represented in that paper, and we then code our results accordingly. So we capture the data at the subdomain level in order to keep track of performance trends, and that's what you can see here in the subdomain level breakdown. Yeah.
So in essence, the NBTs here are being used for diagnostic assessment, but you might have other ways of doing diagnostic assessment. In your context, you might have some type of assessment that you do, for example, early on. And if that data is useful and relevant, then it's worth thinking about how to present it to course conveners. Right, Mohammed, okay, the feedback that you get from lecturers. Okay, I'm going to pass on that question for now because Greg is going to talk about our experience of running this in workshop format. That's a great question, and obviously the most important reason for doing all of this. I'm not sure we can fully answer it, teaser, but we do think about that a lot. Tuanga had a part 2 there. Is there a way we could develop the same metrics to trace academic development post-admission, which is an interesting question because, you know, that question, I think, of preparedness for like a second year course after a first year course is important, and that's sometimes where there are gaps. So people might feel that the assessment of the first year courses is not really capturing what students need in second year or from second to third year. So those transitions can be a little bumpy sometimes. And I think that rests on that sort of sense of articulation between courses. And one of the things we could do is encourage diagnostic assessment, that lecturers, for example, try and do short, quick diagnostic assessment for their incoming student group in their course in whatever format in the first week or two. And so some of what we want to do here with the NBTs and the subdomains is just get people to think about diagnostic assessment. And maybe it hasn't been totally clear as well, but this KYCS is a start of course report. It's what you would look at as you're preparing to teach a new cohort of students. So it's kind of forward looking, like what can I know about the history and what can I do with this group of students? Okay, some good questions there. Let's move on because otherwise we'll steal too much of our breakout time and discussion time. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about the history of this report because you might think it kind of sprung fully formed, or we, you know, thought we should have this and then it appeared, but in fact it was built piecemeal in bits and pieces over quite a number of years, and it evolved over time. And so we started with a really simple idea, which was just that this was kind of low-hanging fruit because we thought it might be useful for lecturers to know the profile of the students that they're teaching. And this information is available, but lecturers don't have easy access to it. So we thought about what does the institution know about students that lecturers don't know about the students. And when that, when students kind of get passed in a sense from being admitted to the university to a program, but now they're being taught, there's this kind of gap. And so someone introduced the concept to me of data waste, or the term, which is quite a nice one, which is, are you using the information you collect? And so we collect a lot of information that we're not necessarily using as well as we could. And so we thought, okay, well, if we can give lecturers some of this information, that might be helpful to them. And so it kind of turned out to be more complicated to build this than we thought, because we had to think carefully about actually each of these different pieces of information that we had. How reliable was the data? Would it be meaningful? How should we present it? So we started just with the first 2 pages of it. And then we tried it out. We got feedback from people. We tweaked it. We developed the companion document, which explains the visualizations in more detail. And we've continued to evolve the companion document. You can see it's a Google Doc, so it's kind of easy to tweak and add things as we go along. Then we added the achievement gap, which was one of the kind of primary purposes, again, to get people to think about these issues. What is the differential performance when you're looking beyond just the pass rate? And then we worked closely with CEA to add the diagnostic assessments and the NBT dimensions of it. We had a separate consultation session with postgrad course conveners, and so we added that postgrad representation, because those was some of the things they said, like what's the most important thing they need to know about their new postgrad students, and that key differentiator, like have they come from a UCT undergrad or another undergrad? So if they come from a UCT undergrad, they felt they knew more about, had a kind of a high level of confidence about that set of students and what they might or might not have done in their undergrad. If they came from another institution, then they were less sure about where those students stood. So that kind of sense of what's the composition of the course and the makeup was important. And so we did this. Throughout these years, we've also, again, taken opportunities to run these in workshop formats. And each time you present one of these, you can get slightly different responses from people, because after you've looked at this a few times, you kind of know how to read it, and you stop realizing what might be easy or difficult for other people to read. So it's always very valuable the first time you show this to somebody to get their sense of what they understand by it. If they're looking at something, is it easy? Is it confusing? And so we continue to get feedback about changes and improvements to make these more understandable at face value for people. Next slide, please, Greg. Okay, so we also realized through the development process that there were quite a lot of different roles involved and expertise. And we were fortunate in a sense, because of the way the DAS project had evolved, that we had a lot of different people involved in the process. And so this wasn't something that belonged to just one department with 1 or 2 people, but we had this kind of big group of 5 to 10 people, and then we would show variations and have discussions on them. So we realized that there were these different roles. They don't always belong in separate people, but these are, in a way, different types of expertise. And so there's a sense of you need somebody who's driving it, who understands why this is something that's important and worth putting time and effort into, who has some concept about its value. The domain expertise around the data is very important. So when we come to the student data, like how is that captured and what does it mean? And that can be more complex than you might expect. Things might look simple at face value, but if you look at a attribute of a student, what's the range of possible values? How reliable is that? So one of the things you'll see, for example, is we worked with redress category rather than population group or race, because it turns out UCT's data has been quite inconsistent and patchy on declared race data for a long time, and that's only recently improved. So the admissions redress category was kind of a better proxy for that. So these are the people who understand the admissions data, who work with it every day, so you're not accidentally misrepresenting something. Then in some cases, we had to get the right data into the right places. And so people who run data warehouses or can connect student data to admissions data or NBT data. the mocking up the report. So often we'll work with like a template and show it to people to give a sense of are we on the right track before we build it in an actual report platform. And then the reports development, so automation obviously is important here. So we'll run 1,000 of these reports at the start of the semester. So you can't run them manually. You need some system that will generate the reports for the right audience. And then we came to care more about data visualization and the graphic design, again, through the experience of showing it to people and seeing what people understood. And we've had some great seminars from Professor Michelle Cuttle, who teaches data visualization at UCT. So she's run webinars for us on how to present data that's not only, well, that is clear actually, and whether it looks good is kind of a secondary consideration, but can people read it? Does it represent what you're trying to say? And then the companion document is our way of trying to make the report as understandable as possible. And so we need to set out definitions, for example, where we don't have space to do that on the main report. There's a reference. So if someone says, what does this actually mean? You can go and get the detail that builds confidence in the actual data. And then advocates and staff developers. So again, this is like, so you built something, but it needs to have some impact. So how do you connect it with the people who it's valuable for? And then one of the aspects of connecting all these different roles and people and expertise is just making it actually all work and move forward, because it's kind of if you do have a virtual model and this expertise lives in lots of different places, then it's no one person's job just to do this. So you have to get the right input at the right time. Thanks. Next. Next slide, Greg. Okay, so in the beginning, our plan for getting these in front of people was basically we would email them to course conveners at the start of the semester. And so we thought that would be the best way of getting eyeballs on them. It would show up in someone's mailbox that says, here's a report on the course that you're about to start teaching. Whereas if you say, okay, there's a website, you can go to it and you can look at the report if you want, then people are not necessarily aware that it's there. So we still think this is a good thing to do, but one of the difficulties with just emailing it to course conveners is, as a university, we don't have very complete and accurate data on who the course conveners are, which might surprise you, but every institution has its strengths and weaknesses, and we're a little bit too decentralized for that data to be captured always accurately at the right time. And so sometimes course conveners change. So we maybe have kind of a 70% hit rate on sending emails, and the email has arrived with the right person who's teaching the course this year. So what we did as a backup strategy was to build a tool inside the learning management system, LMS. So we use Brightspace, but you might use Moodle or something else. So this is a little tool that is built using what's called LTI, which is a plugin standard for tools. So it just runs on our server and it lets you just request this report whenever you need it. And this has actually become quite popular because people might want these at different times, or they might know that the enrollment's changing and they want it a couple of weeks later than the start of the term, etc. So it also is just another way of making this more visible. The LMS is where they go anyway. And we also wanted these reports to be available not only to the course convener, but there might be other lecturers or people in the teaching team who would benefit from them. So this is kind of our secondary backup strategy for distribution. Okay, what's next? Okay, and this next section is over to Greg.
Thank you, Stephen. So yes, I think Stephen's covered a little bit of some of this already, but in terms of just talking a little bit about how we use the reports with staff and some of the feedback and some of the conversations around that. So I think there's a couple of different things that we do in terms of, one of the things is and different levels are available. So one of the things, we have a new academic practitioners program for sort of emerging academics. And as part of that program, we bring in a session around the use of data for student success, and that includes a focus of unpacking what's in the KYCS reports, but also a focus of understanding what data analytics are available and where those can be accessed. But then importantly, also then how can lecturers use the data, work with the data, and what does that mean for how they teach, and some of the decisions that they make around curriculum. The other aspect as well that we do is that each year in terms of the institution's annual teaching and learning conference, we host or run workshops related to data analytics and student success. And those then have sort of particular themes that we pick up on that have a little bit more time for academics to come together and have discussions in terms of how reports are being used, the data's, how it's being applied, but not also only that, obviously also then there may also be presentations at the conference around how certain lecturers have made changes to their courses, and what some of the implications have been for making those changes. We do have also then webinars, as Stephen was talking about earlier, as those reports are available at the start of the semester or just before the start of the semester. We do schedule a webinar, particularly for new course conveners or perhaps maybe new lecturers as well, just to help understand and unpack what is in the KYCS reports and how to use those reports. And again, we often get good feedback in terms of people's questions or academics' questions around what certain things mean and how to use them, and that also then feeds back into our use of the reports. And then I think a key aspect as well is in terms of giving opportunities for lecturers in particular faculties or particular schools or departments, or even within particular programs, or sort of coming together and having further discussions. And I think, you know, that's about one is at a particular course level, but also looking at it from a more holistic or wider lens, particularly looking at a program or a department in terms of that sort of key question around how do we visualize the course data, how do we get that to new insights, and then importantly, as Mohammed was asking earlier around what are the interventions that we can then do to prompt student success. And I think, yes, there's some aspects that are, again, coming back to the data where it's easy to sort of see data in terms of what sort of requests are coming in terms of data. Zanette was saying earlier, because academics can sort of ask for additional data. So we can sort of track some of those data requests to sort of see what's being asked for and what's being valued, having conversations with lecturers around what changes they're making and around applying sort of some of the data to that. But yes, as Stephen said, although it's something that we do think about a lot, it's not something that we necessarily have a sort of answer yet in terms of, you know, can we see from this report there's been a shift that this has made and this has been the impact in terms of that's led to student success. But there are aspects that we sort of are working towards around that. I think one of the aspects in terms of working with academics around this, again, looking at the reports again, is that some of the concepts may all be less familiar to some staff than others, depending on their disciplines and their fields as well, in terms of, you know, some things like in terms of understanding what a median is versus a mean. Some people are very familiar maybe with the box and whiskers plot. Other academics may look at that and sort of haven't really have an understanding around that. So a lot of the work that in terms of supporting academics in using these reports is making sure that there's a sense of what's really what they're looking at, as we said earlier, and understanding what are the different aspects that have been drawn on and what those mean. So I think that's an important part of the aspect as well, is that reinforcing that aspect around data literacy levels, and making sure that when we're working with academics that we're sort of getting everyone on the same page in terms of understanding of some of the concepts that are used in the reports and what those mean and how they can make decisions based on what they're seeing. So I think for a particular course academic, in terms of contextualizing the analytics they're getting from the course result that they get, sorry, the KYC report as they get at the start. And again, remember, so that's one aspect is we're focusing on today, is that KYCS report that happens that you get at the start of the course. But as you go through the course, there's also analytics that are coming through from the LMS. Again, that can be quite difficult to manage because academics may use the LMS in quite different ways, and in some courses they may use it very little, versus others where they use it quite a lot. And again, it depends on how it's being set up in terms of the kinds of analytics that come through, but then academics also look at the end of course reports in terms of what happened in the course and what the results were, and performance of students, etc. So again, in terms of contextualizing analytics, is to sort of think about, particularly this is more useful for academics who have been teaching, or course conveners and lecturers who've been teaching on the same course for a number of years, because then have a much better sense of what their course context is, and some ideas around why certain perhaps students do well or not well in a specific course. And again, the sort of reasons therefore are quite variable across different levels and different disciplines, different faculties, etc. But often when working with academics in terms of thinking about, they may have some hypothesis or sort of working theory, even if it's something that's not maybe particularly thought out or sort of thought about, but that sort of sense of where are the areas in the course where there may be something that could be changed, or where there may be something that is a struggle or an issue or something like that. And when thinking about that, is to then sort of think about which of those can be tested. So, are there's some hypotheses that you may have that sort of may not be able to actually have any data on that, and so maybe not be able to test. And then sort of thinking about, once we can test something, what data can we use to test? And so that helps to sort of meld that idea of saying, we've got these sort of ideas or sort of working thoughts, or almost assumptions around perhaps what things are working and not working, and perhaps certain assumptions around certain groups of students, but having the data to sort of then able to look back and sort of test that and say, is this really what's happening? And again, looking at not always having the data available to give a complete picture, but there may be some data available that can be used to test that. So I think that's an important part of working with academics as well, is in terms of trying to really mesh the idea of the course context, what's happening in that specific course, what changes have been made over the years, with the sort of data that we get from the KYCS report. Okay. And then the other aspect then is to sort of utilize any insights that are emerging from these reports. So again, to sort of spark conversations with academics and working with course conveners and lecturers to think about, what are the insights that this report may give you in your context, and to sort of think through those and sort of look at sort of where the data is available and what's that saying, and then also thinking about what interventions or changes can envision, and again thinking about not only aspects related to the curriculum, but also the pedagogies as well, in terms of what is being taught and how it is being taught, and whether the changes can be made in that. And sometimes they can be quite small changes that can be made that can make a difference in that. And again, also looking at in terms of the reports, particularly the KYCS report, may not answer all the questions that they have. So there may be other things as well that either there may be elsewhere, there may be data for it, or things that are not easily able to be captured in terms of the questions that academics may be facing. And again, thinking about also what's the most significant information. So what's the most important? And again, as we saw earlier, the reports are standardized across the faculties, but there may be certain faculties, certain departments, certain disciplines where some aspects or parts of the report may be more significant to other, and how those are used may be then taken forward. And I think that's what makes this work a little bit tricky in that aspect, is because it is something that needs to be approached in a very contextualized way, and that highlights the number of differences across how different courses are taught, the numbers of students that are on those courses, the sort of teaching approaches, the pedagogies as well, all influence that as well. Okay, and I think that then brings us into the time for the breakout rooms. So I think the idea now is we're going to go into 15 minutes for breakout rooms, where we've got 3 questions that we'd like you to discuss in your breakout rooms. The first question is around, how can you make use of data visualizations for academic staff at your institution? So there may be things that you're doing already, or maybe things that you're thinking of trying. What are those available for staff with your institution? And looking at the experiences of what we share today at UCT, in terms of the sort of journey that we've been through, in terms of what are some of the steps that you might take to try and join the dots or create something new. And again, in recognizing that each institution is different and may have different things. Again, like Stephen said earlier, there may be certain things that work well at your institution, maybe some things work less well, and again, that will then affect ways in which you take forward. And then question 3, in terms of what sort of data do you have access to already, or resources or things like that, and what do you still need? Okay. I think, Ashton, are you setting up the breakouts?
Yes, we're ready to go.
Okay. Okay, great. Can give us 15 minutes and then put us into the breakouts. And I think I'll just also just copy those questions again, so we've got those in the chat for people as well.
Yeah, I think we're waiting. Right. I think we've all been teleported back. Might have lost a couple along the way, but let's press on. Okay, so we have about 12 minutes left, and we need to leave a little bit of time for the session evaluation at the end. So yeah, we want to hear a bit about what you spoke about in your breakout rooms. So can I ask somebody from group 1 to share a couple of thoughts?
Yes, hi, Stephen. I'll come in from group 1. I think we sort of discussed some of the contextual challenges that are similar across our institutions, particularly in terms of getting access to data. And I think the sort of big thought that we sort of were working with is how to get data in front of the right people at the right time to make the decisions, because it so often happens that either the information is sent but it's not used, or the reports are being read but they're not being used to make decisions. And again, trying to work with lots of different people from lots of different areas in the university is quite difficult sometimes in terms of making sure that people get things when they need to at the right time, and that's something that we talked a little bit about. Then we also spoke a little bit about how something that came up in sort of different institutions was just that idea of the sort of data literacies and being able to work with data, because often, for example, a lot of academics, they can sort of do some basic things in Excel, but maybe some of the sort of really nifty features and some of the things that to really be able to visualize data and work with data, that's an area that we need maybe work more time on. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Greg. Group 2.
Group 2, I had the pleasure of talking to Oliver, who is from Northwest University, who is a student success researcher. And Northwest University has one of the more developed student dashboard systems that I know of personally, because I met a couple of their developers at last year's DataFest conference. And from Oliver, what I've gathered is that there are these institutional dashboards that have lots of details on them. They are very basic, but very accessible, and everybody seems to use them. But what they're hoping to going forward is a more detailed, higher resolution view of the dashboards at the level of faculty, schools, and at module level. The module level is definitely the one that is missing, even though some of the faculties have taken it upon themselves to build their own views of the same dashboards. And as far as what they need going forward, the same problem that we see in our case and in most other institutions is the problem of data silos. Data is collected or generated in one area and does not necessarily is not necessarily integrated with the central system, or does not talk to central systems. And another issue that was mentioned that hopefully will be solved, that will make the data very rich, would be the collection and integration of qualitative data in terms of evaluations from staff and students to form part of an overall holistic view of what Oliver called more problematic courses that the institution is keeping its eyes on. So in a whole, that's what conversations from room 2 looked like. Over to room 3.
Great, thanks. And we hope Oliver's maybe planning a webinar for all of us, Ashton
Yes.
taking notes. And on that related topic of the qualitative data, I think that would also be a great webinar topic, because many of us already, would love to explore that more, different approaches and strategies to qualitative student success data. Group 3.
I think I was in group 3. I'm not sure which group number it was, but here I am. So group 3, we had we had a couple of people, but I think just there were 3 main points that came out of the conversation. So the colleagues from UKZN were commenting on how they have this very sophisticated auto scholar system, and they have huge amounts of data, but that is very overwhelming for lecturers. It's very hard for them to use it because, there's just so much of it. And so the take home there was how important it is to do to create visualizations that then make the data accessible and usable. And we commented in our group about data is not enough. It is what is the insight that you want to give the end user to inform your visualizations. That almost ends up being more important to the end user. And so that was an important one that came out in terms of thinking of how to move forward. Mohammed from CPUT mentioned that they also have walked this journey of developing dashboards and having the data available for the staff and the lecturers. And one of the issues is that there's this tension between what we report on as an institution and then what people take seriously in terms of the data in the classrooms, because we report on pass rates, we report on throughput, we report on retention, and then you give lecturers all this nuanced information about their students and their courses, and yet they continue to chase pass rates. So that was something that came up, and the colleague was saying that he's now actually looking at what are some of the other measures that can be used to really inform the student experience rather than necessarily success rates, because everyone's just chasing pass rates. And what are some of the other things that are happening that's available in the data that can inform a better student experience that then and learning experience that maybe lecturers would like to take on board as they chase pass rates. So that was the second important point. And then the third one was that, that the work does require the breaking down of silos and these having of data warehouses. But then the comment that I made relative to that was you can also have a structure that interfaces your data sets, even if you don't right now have big data warehouses with all the data in one place. You can have people that come together and talk about the data. In fact, at UCT, even though we have a data warehouse, the knowledge of the data is siloed. Some people know where the data is, some people know what the data means, some people know how we actually use the data. So you still need those structures to come together to talk to each other. Real integration. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Reshna. And group 4, we had Sondila and Sibonga both from the UT, and I'm going to pick on Sondila to just share some themes from our discussion.
Thanks, Richard. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute, but I think on our case, we were sharing that there's quite a lot of work that we're doing now with the ways that we have improved the system on AutoScholar and the kind of data that actually we are seeing there, which a bulk of it is just really the performance data of different modules. But we have piloted this year in particular a survey on biographical data, and we also looking into improving on that as well in terms of how we're collecting quintile data, first generations data, and so that we begin then to make the correct correlations in terms of one, the proactive use of the baseline data as we prepare for support for students, but then also maybe responsively looking into how students are performing historically in the different modules, and how then do we plan for things like tutorials and make sure that the support is there for students. And we were sharing that this is quite important for us because in the past few years, we have seen a downward trend on the student success data. So we're looking into really drilling data into even just looking at the academic performances or even assessment performances of students, so that we begin to see what are the practices, what are the interventions that are put in place, and how those interventions are impacting on as little as the test results of the students. And if we see that there are positive shifts, then we look into what has been done in those modules and how then we can actually leverage on that and maybe share it with other faculties as well to see how it works. But the contextualized intervention, the contextualized use of the visualization of data and how then it's interpreted and what it means for academics and academic support, I think has been at the center of the conversation that we are having now as an institution. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So important themes there about impact, closing the loop. That is us out of time for today. So there's maybe a minute left for Ashton to tell you about the evaluation survey, which we would like you to complete, and also Ashton's ad. Don't forget Siphumelele Conference, 8th to 11th July. And over to Ashton to wrap up from our hosts. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, we will be emailing the recording as well as the presentation to everybody who attended. Stephen, would it be possible for UCT just to consolidate some of the feedback from the groups and just to put that in a document, and then we'll be able to share it with everybody who attended? Mohammed was saying that that was really good feedback. So if you wouldn't mind, yeah, and then we'll share that early next week. And as I say, that will include the evaluation link, which you can use to generate your certificate of attendance. Yeah, thank you very much to UCT for hosting this service workshop. And a reminder about the upcoming Siphumelele conference, where we'll be able to meet and share and collaborate some more. The call for proposals is open, as well as the conference registration. Thank you very much, UCT, for hosting this.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
bye,
Bye.
bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.